Story time, and it's a tale as old as time. So, when I grew up, very much a religious household, lots of rules, lots of control, things that we weren't supposed to say, weren't supposed to watch, weren't supposed to do. And because of that, that put me in a very high strung environment. I was very much so one of those, what you call a good kid, right? And I did everything I was supposed to do. I had good grades, I did all my chores, I listened to my parents, blase, blase, blue. What this did to me energetically was stifle any type of expression that I thought I had. Of course, I was a very outgoing kid. I've talked about this before. I was into the arts, I played instruments, I was very vocal, I loved to sing, dance, all of these things, design. But then society started to encroach on me. It started to tell me, boys don't do that, and you're not allowed to do that, you can't enjoy that. And so I became more sterile and more sterile over time. And so as I grew up through my family, I started to recognize patterns of disassociation where we were not really attuned and tapped into our gifts the way we talked about it freely. Like my mom was very much an artistic person, and she used to design and make hats, and she had her own business, and she was an entrepreneur. And then out of nowhere, somewhere, it kind of just became very much, she stifled in her own creativity, where it was just very much more religious and more about the household and all of these duties and titles, again, that comes from society that says you can't enjoy being this person while being this role, which makes no sense, of course. And so because of this, like all kids who grew up in very, I would say, rural-based homes, we learned how to get away with stuff, right? We would sneak out and go to parties and drink and do all these things we weren't supposed to be doing, but we were trying to experience life. And because of this, it taught us how to numb ourselves. So by the time I was 19, 20 years old, I was so ready to get out of that house. I was like, I'm moving and I'm never coming back. And honestly, I did. You know, I still talked to my family, but for a while, I kind of disassociated and talked to no one. So I ran to Chicago at 20 years old with some friends. Well, first I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and that's where I met a group of people where we were all kind of the same trauma bond teenagers. Families not really around. Some of them, their parents were a lot further off, or I would say worse, as far as how they treated them or just the environments they grew up in. And so we became this like small, close-knit family where we protected each other. But it was a lot of protection, again, through trauma. And so I will get to that later in the story, but for now, these were my people at the time. So to me, they were fabulous. Like, we never waited in lines. We got whatever we wanted. We always had some type of status or money and food and friends and men and whatever, trips, all these things that just came so easily to us. So little to our understanding of what energetic power is, we were using our gifts the way they were supposed to be used, untapped, untapered, unhindered, right? And so when you're young and you're getting all these things coming to you, you don't know why you have this power, but unfortunately, some of us learn to abuse this power because we see that we couldn't get away with it within our family unit, or could have, and then it either gets to a bigger point where we learn to exploit it because we got away with it and we really think that no one can touch us and we become untouchable, or we get to a point where we see that now we won't get in trouble for it, and so we learn how to exploit that energy more so because it feels kind of fun to be seedy. This is a lot of young energy, and it doesn't matter what age you are. There's a lot of people I still meet where their energy is still very young, where the seedy feels good because it feels like they're getting away with something or it's exciting. And so this was our life for a good majority of my life, from, I would say, at least all of my formative years, from like 20 up until about 30, honestly. And so by the time I left Michigan, I was in Chicago, and I was there for 12 years. And when I tell you, I partied. I was doing it all the drinking, all the coitus, all the different types of drugs and things that are related to partying and the partying scene. And so my first 6 years there, I would say everything was perfect. I had a great job. I was making all this money. I was living in a nice place. I had all these friends. Everything was going great. And then eventually, just like a plant gets root rot, I was in overindulgence mode where I started to basically kill myself in a way. I was overly drinking and partying to the point that I didn't notice that I was rotting from the inside out and decaying. But just like a plant, who knows if it knows it's rotting, but it's still trying to thrive and live and survive in the forest. But amongst the other trees that are thriving, to us, it looks like it's falling apart. To it feels like it's living still. And so that's kind of how it was with myself and my groups of friends. And we were just so focused on chasing boys and partying and not really thinking about other people's emotions or feelings that we got caught up in the hype of it all. And so again, we kept abusing this gift of confidence, of knowing who we are, of knowing ourselves, right? I would meet people who'd be like, who do you think you are? And I'd be like, I'm this person and you can't tell me nothing about myself. You can't tell me nothing. And people still barely can. But there was inner parts of me that over time, I started to lose that type of confidence. And so even though on the outside looking in, people still assumed that I was this person, as time went on, I started to slowly start feeling like imposter syndrome, where I'm like, why am I so confident? Why do I feel like everything works out for me? Why? And little by little, it started to chip away at what I knew I was capable of. And so eventually it got to the point where I had to leave Chicago because it felt like, and I said it to a friend, I was like, Chicago was going to be the death of me. Like the way that I was going out 7 days a week, different clubs, different bars. Then it has the point where they have the nightlife where there's like 5 a.m. bars. So I'm out past 4 a.m. all night, getting up, going to work, showing up late, showing up drunk still. And thank God again, I still had this charm of a superpower that a lot of my bosses kind of let it go because they saw me in them, right? And you have these people where it's like, they're smarter than this. Like they're too smart for this. Because for me growing up, I was a dork. I was in math and science club. I played the cello, I played the piano, I was in an orchestra or in a choir. I did all these things that were very artistic and expressive. So like energy just naturally was called to me. People naturally wanted to help me. But because I came from a place of kind of being bullied in a religious household, I lashed out. I didn't believe the people who told me I was smart enough to do better. I felt, well, I'm gonna get what I wanna get and do what I wanna do because I know I can. And that was the life I lived for a very long time. So when I had the opportunity to move away from these friends, again, they were cool people, but they were young too. And I just got to a point where even though I never expressed to them because I'm very much an Aquarius, I ghosted and disappeared on a lot of people because it was like, they didn't understand when I was trying to get better and get healthier. They were just like, oh, you goody two-shoe. Oh, you're trying to eat better. You're trying to drink better. You think you're better than us. And it felt really defeating because I thought they were my friends, but really I saw that they didn't know how to step outside of that world themselves. So it does feel like someone's changing on you, right? You have those friends, that old group that you're changing, you're not the same. And a lot of us are like, yeah, that's the point. So to get away, I ended up moving to San Diego. Like another friend was moving and I was like, I'll go with you. And we just uprooted and went to San Diego. And for me, it was scary because I've never been anywhere further than Michigan. So moving from Michigan to Chicago felt like a big leap. But to go from Chicago to San Diego, that was a huge world change. And that's where I truly found my soul. I knew my ego very well, right? When I was growing up, I knew parts of me. I knew the baby sides of me. Chicago really boosted my ego, but it also boosted me to a level of almost narcissistic ego, where I just thought I can do whatever I wanted and treat people however I wanted. Even though I was still the kind one in my group, I still let things happen around people by the people who were being mean girls, right? By association, yes, I was still a mean boy. I was still a mean girl because I was letting things happen versus trying to stop it, even if it wasn't at my hands. And so I knew that that energy was not a part of my genuine soul. And I just went through a situation where I've talked about it before, where I ended up being hospitalized and no one knew I was in the hospital for over 7 days. And that was a wake-up call of like, this is not where I belong. I need to get out of here. So San Diego happened. And when I went to San Diego, that was my opportunity to find myself again. There was so much nature, there was so much beauty, hiking and vegans and people who seemed to really care about their soul. Again, humans are humans, so humans will still be who they are. It does not mean that because another human or person is like your tribe energy that they're going to be exactly the same soul path as you, or same soul imprint, right? I've said this before where there's people who speak our language, but that doesn't mean that they're on the same journey as us. And so I had to understand that that integration of relearning who I was not going to be easy, but it was definitely something that I needed to initiate myself into. And so through that process, I was back into my soul path of overly loving and overly giving. And then I got into a very much a habit of overgiving, oversharing, overloving. And it was just to a point where I had a friend from my old tribe from Michigan. They came to move out there with me, and I knew in my heart that they weren't ready, but I wanted to give them the opportunity, and they came back out there with the same antics, the same overly heavy drug usage and partying and nightlife hooking up and just disturbing the peace. And I was like, I left because I wanted to get away from this, and you're dragging it back to me. And unfortunately, that was my choice to let them come there, so I can't blame them. But it really did mess up a good thing that I had going. And so the roommate I lived with moved out. Then the place I was at, they just kind of kept bringing strangers into our space, and it was just messing up the energy flow. So I had to move out quickly as well and started dating someone. And for me, this is kind of where it started to decay more, and I started to lose track of my energy. Because we have to remember, along this journey, it is fine to want to have a partner or date someone or have someone who comes along with you. But what you don't want to do is give up your entire existence and identity to someone who is not on the same path as you. Again, it's okay to date. It's not okay to negate. And so after this ex-friend of mine came back and kind of stirred things up, and I let them go again, and I told them, I was like, we can't, if this is who you're going to be still, we can't be friends. And so we had to disappear from each other and exit each other's lives. And I ended up moving in with a partner at the time, and they told me that they didn't want anything long term, but I still was investing heavily into them. And I got caught up in the house and the car and all of this. And in one swift swipe, in 1 month, they broke up with me, my lease was ending, and the job I was working, the department closed. So I lost all the things that I thought were important to me all at once. And I know people have told this story before, but when it happens to you, it's like something is making space for me, or something is trying to teach me something. Whichever way it is, I have to accept it and keep moving. And so when this all happened, I took the breakup as gracefully as I could, packed up my car, put everything away in storage, and I drove up the coast of California and just went camping and living my life and living off grid with me and my dog. And it was great for a moment. And then I made it to Oregon, and I started to repeat the pattern of the same energy that the friend who came to visit me saw. And this is where I tell people, pay attention to soul attachments and soul contracts, because up until that point I was doing good, but when I felt depressed and sad, I got back into heavy drinking and heavy hooking up and heavy things that I knew were not good for me. Eating crappy, all this stuff that it was just not my energy. And so I was like, I gotta figure out what I wanna do. I can't keep living out of my car and driving around. Again, it was by choice. I had a job. Well, I didn't have a job at this point. Eventually I was like, I gotta drive back west or back east to get a job. I was like, I can't keep living like this. And so this is where I know my energy kind of started to fall apart, where I was supposed to drive back to Chicago, but something stopped me, and I was on apps, and this is where the apps start. I met people who I remember from the past, and they was like, hey, I'm in Iowa, you know, you should stop here, like you're driving through. And I was like, you know what, I have nothing to lose. So I drove across country and stopped in Iowa. And I ended up stopping here in this place, supposedly temporarily, and it turned into probably for me, the worst experience of my life. At this point in time, I was dating someone, but energetically we just weren't aligned. And I could tell that he wasn't happy, I wasn't happy. We were just, forcing it to happen. I literally just moved in with them within a week after talking to them for almost not between, we had almost 4 years in between, or 6 years in between knowing each other. So went from a hookup that was, again, I remember why we only hooked up once, to trying to date and live together in a small town where I knew nobody. And at this time, I was just like, this is not where I'm meant to be. This is not where I'm meant to be. And so I was starting to just kind of lose hope for a while. And so, I was like, I can get my financial aid going. I can go back to school. So I went back to school, and I just started to, I was still unemployed, and they were letting me stay there. And I started to get my degree in communications because I was already a great speaker, at least that's what I feel. And I was already interested in media. So that felt like the right thing to do. And at this point in time, again, I was just living off checks. I had unemployment still, I had school, so I was fine. I was paying them rent and everything, but it got to a point where I started to feel depressed again. And this person was drinking a fifth a day and smoking a pack a day. And I never knew this side of them. And so again, our energy started to get dragged back down, and I started to feel lost and confused again, where I'm like, this energy doesn't belong to me. Why do I keep attracting this energy? Now, it's not the people, it was me. But at this time, it felt like everybody was coming against me. So I hopped on the apps and I started talking to different people. I met a guy who I should have never invested in, a town over. I drove to this town, hung out with them. I ended up liking them. I broke up with the person I was with, and it was horrible. I could have did it better, but I was talking with a friend on the phone. I was talking about parts of their body that I probably shouldn't have, and they heard me, but they didn't let me know they heard me. And so, again, I broke up with the person first, but I was still living in their house. And rightfully so. When I left, they were like, I'm kicking this person out. So they put all my stuff in bags and basically put it outside. And I was just like, okay, well, whatever, do what you gotta do. And one night they were like trying to let me stay before I moved out, when we were hanging out, and I got really, really blacked out drunk. And I got in the car and drove, which I should have never did. And fell asleep in the car, and that's the part that's funny. I never actually talked about this. This was out in the country, so there's not a lot of cars and stuff, so it wasn't really me hurting anyone, but I was hurting myself because anything could have happened to me. And so I parked on the side of the road and fell asleep. And the cops were like, oh, this man is drunk. And so that started a DUI and a whole process of all of this crap that I had to go through for over a year. Breathalyzer in my car, stuck in this town that I didn't want to be in. And I left the person who kicked me out, and I ended up living with this person who turned out to be the biggest drug dealer in the town. Had no idea. I was not into the stuff that they were dealing. It was some dirty stuff. I'm just gonna put it that way. And they were a heavy user, unbeknownst to me. And so I was just so convinced that I was in this love with them, in this Delulu world, and I was trying to make it work. And they were cheating and talking to their ex and doing everything other than being kind to me. And this is when I knew that I was allowing my energy to degrade itself and go further down and not remember who I was. And so I ended up getting a house there, and this person, one friend of mine told me I got a job. I went through an unemployment agency or a temporary agency, got a job and started working, and just worked a bunch of different odd jobs. And then I got lucky and got the job I have now. And so this person was still bringing people into the house, bringing drugs into the house, doing all kinds of things that I didn't approve of. And they were just basically gaslighting me and torturing me just because I think they felt they could. So this is when I got the news that unfortunately the friend who moved to California with me, who was doing all the heavy drugs and stuff and all the usage, I heard they turned their life around, but they ended up passing away. And that put me into a deep, deep depression because this person was one of my best friends since I was like 17 years old up until the age of 30 something. So hearing this news was it was a tragedy because it wasn't a natural death. It was not the best way to go. So I just felt lost again. And this person that was around me, they just reminded me of the energy that they were in. And I was like, I can't be around you. You're not healthy. And so I basically packed my stuff up and did a Dear John letter. I basically was like, yeah, we're no good together. I'm leaving. I left. I literally packed everything up with her at work and left and never looked back. And so when I got this job, I was still trying to figure out who I was. And so I was moving around, and as soon as my DUI lifted and I got my breathalyzer out of my car, I instantly was like, I gotta get out of Iowa. This is not where I wanna be. I don't belong here. And I moved off to Minnesota. Again, I met someone else. And, we were doing good and dating and stuff and getting to know each other. And, they thought that they were ready. We were only dating like 6 months, but they were like, you should come here. So, I came to visit, and then I ended up staying and ended up moving in with them. Even though I was only supposed to be visiting, they let me move in with them, which again, that was rude of me. I should have never did that. But at the time, I was so focused on trying to have someone rescue me that I was not allowing myself to rescue myself. So even though, like I said, I started off very young, 4.0, playing the cello, playing the piano, art school, traveling, all these things, I let it fall to the wayside. Just like, unfortunately, I saw the pattern that my mom was replicating where she allowed her husband, my stepdad, to kind of take over in a way that we all knew wasn't healthy, but what can you do when you feel you're in love? And so I've always had this pattern of thinking that love mattered more than self. And even though I know it's not true, I still had that identity even within my family unit, like my brothers and sisters and everyone else. It's like everyone marries young, has kids young, settles down young, and you think that like that's the picture perfect life. And then you find out later that they're kind of like, I wish I had waited. But at the time you just feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So I was just depressed that everyone had a partner and had a home and had kids, and it was just me out in the streets repeating this pattern that unfortunately was of my biological father, who passed away some years later, but he also was just out in the streets, and he was a beautiful artist as well, and he lost track of who he was. And so that was the moment when I was in Minnesota, and I remember when my friend passed, and I was just kind of like, I'm living my father's pattern. I'm living my mother's pattern. I'm literally replicating their journeys, but double, like from both sides. I stopped my creativity on top of I'm abusing my body and mind just because I'm not allowing myself to love myself enough to be enough for myself. And so the relationship I was in, I noticed that they started to get depressed. Like they wrote a cookbook, and then that kind of inspired me to be like, you know what, I'm gonna write. And so I started writing again, and like it got me into this energy where I was happy again, but they were depressed. And so I started to really pay attention to like, oh, like energetically speaking, I'm getting my energy back, but it's draining their energy. And in a weird way, again, that person was a beautiful person, but that's when I started to recognize that when I'm thriving, if I'm not around the right energies, they're dying. And if they're thriving, I'm dying. So when I say this dying, I mean energetically, spiritually, artistically. I was around people who we call energy vampires, and they were draining me because they wanted to be better than me. And I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. They wanted me to be a slave to their needs. They wanted me to be mediocre to what they felt I should be. And so when I would go back and think about all the times in Chicago, I'd be like, I used to go out and just talk to anybody, walk up to any opportunity, and I had no hangups. Why is it now it's hard for me to tell people no, and I feel like I'm not supposed to be greater than myself? And so that's when I really got into the spiritual realm and the spiritual understanding of self. And so this is when I did my first book. Again, I always tell people, I still feel that my first book needs a proper editor, but it wasn't about the book being perfect. It was about finally opening the floodgates to all this energy that I had to express and all this stuff that I had to say. And so at the time, I said it in the best way that I knew how. It wasn't, again, the most articulate book, but it was my book. And so from that journey, it allowed me to remember who I was. And so going future forward, me and this person, they kind of tell me like, I don't want you living here anymore, so I have to get a temporary housing again. So I moved out. Mind you, this has happened to me a lot of times where I was, instead of making my own foundation, I was trying to move myself into other people's energy and build off of that and build a house and home, because that's what I was taught you do, like struggle love. But really, that was not my path. That was never meant to be my journey. That's why I was the black sheep of the family. Like, I was meant to be someone different than everyone else. Again, when you don't see it, you don't see it. As we say, the rotting tree, well, it wasn't so much that I was rotting, I just didn't belong there. I had to decay so that my seeds can be spread somewhere else. And that's exactly what happened. So moving forward, I ended up getting another place, and one of my friends that I met in Chicago that I moved to San Diego with, they moved to Denver because that's where their family was, and they were like, hey, you should come move to Denver. And so I was like, I'll come check it out. So again, I packed everything up from Minnesota and I went to Denver, and I was there for like a month or so because they just moved out and they would let me use their apartment and while I looked for mine. And energetically, it was just not aligning. That's when I started to really pay attention to patterns. Like, things were just not lining up for me because I was doing so much forcing that I wasn't listening. And so my spiritual gifts started to heighten when I started to realize that. For me, I don't know for other people, when I see too many repeating numbers, it's a warning. For some people, it's an invitation. For me, as a projector, it's a warning, like, stop, you're doing too much, slow down, back up, don't go there, don't do this. And so I started to listen to that, and I started to really focus on like, this energy is not aligned with me. And so at this time, I met another band and they reminded me so much of my friend from the past. And I started to really pay attention to, oh, there are different bodies, but the same energy. This is where we started to pay attention to karmic cycles. And this was my first introduction to, I'm in a karmic loop. It doesn't matter where I move or where I live. I'm literally gonna call in the same type of people and energy no matter where I go, because I keep trying to run away from it. Stop running from the energy. And this person, they were lovely and all, but they just got divorced and they had 2 kids and they were still kind of traumatized and the kids were going through a lot. And I'm just like, this is not gonna work, I'm sorry. They're like, you can live in my garage. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. And that's when I knew that I was healing, because old me would have been like, sure, okay, yeah, we'll figure it out. And I was like, no, this is not gonna work. So I ended up leaving Denver and heading to St. Louis. And again, this is coming full circle. Some of the friends that I had from Michigan, who I originally grew up with, the partiers, they let me stay with them. And so I was staying with them, and I was, again, beautiful people. I'm not saying anything ill will of anyone, but I knew energetically I outgrown their energy. And it was the same thing that I grew up with in my home. Just beautiful home, beautiful cars, beautiful life, but miserable together. Drinking every day, not happy, gossiping, talking about people. And I was just like, this is not my journey. So I ended up I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna run away from it. I'm gonna fulfill this karmic path. I'm gonna do it. So I ended up finding my own place. And, I still have the same job that I have. We went remote. So that was a blessing. During COVID, we went remote. So I was able to kind of jump around. This was the beauty of this. And I got my own place, and I was there for about 3 years. But in those 3 years, I kept, again, meeting groups of people where I was like, they reminded me of everyone from my childhood that I knew I was not meant to be friends with. And so I pulled back and I tried to make other groups of friends, but again, it was just the same energy of partying, drinking. And I was like, I don't belong here either. And when I had the opportunity to sell my car, because the Kia boys, whatever you want to call that, they kept breaking into my car, like literally 4 times, ruined my car. I had to put so much money into fixing it. And eventually I had to just sell it because it was pointless at this point. It was like, I owned the car, but it was like 2011, and I was putting more money into it than the value of it, or the depreciation. I don't know how to say all that stuff, but it was the value was no longer there. And so my insurance was going up, and it was just becoming really frustrating. So I had to get rid of the car. And so at this time, I was really focused on trying to preserve my energy. But I was dating, and I met someone, and we tried, and then I realized again that I was just repeating the same path, because they were like pushing off time and wanting me to move into their house. And I was just like, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. And the friends who I was hanging out with, they were like judging everybody that I dated. And I'm just like, this isn't high school. I'm not that kid who used to listen to your guys' opinion. And the crazy part is, I forgot that that's how a lot of us live our lives. I was literally dating people based on who my friends thought were attractive enough for me to be with. And I'm like, you're not with me. I don't care if you guys can imagine us in the bed together. I don't imagine my friends in the bed together. I've never done that. I'm just being honest. It's not been something I'm into, but I realize there's a lot of people out there who do that. And so they were literally sabotaging me, and I was sabotaging myself by listening to what they desired versus what I desire. And that's when I was like, I'm good. And we ended up going on a vacation somewhere, and I just saw that these people were still very mad and miserable and angry. And I was like, I can't stay friends with you. And as much as I would have loved to, I knew that it was in my best interest to let them go. And so this was the shedding process of my spiritual journey, where it was like everything was leading up to this. The one friend passed away, the other friend fell away, the other friend, they just didn't change. And it was just like, I kept thinking things would be quick and rapid like they used to be when I was younger. But for me, my spiritual journey was like, you have to clean up your energy. You've made such a mess of your energy that it's spewing everywhere. And the more you don't patch up these holes, the more you're gonna leak everywhere. And that's when the aha finally kicked in, and I was like, got it. I am meant to remind myself of who I am. So like when you think of celebrities and stuff, I love to use Cardi B as an example. And people look at her and be like, oh, her life is this and she's been through this, but she knows who she is. It doesn't matter who you think somebody thinks you are. You have to know who you are. So no matter if you're petty or this or that, if you know who you are and you call that energy in, you're gonna get what you want. And so I was judging all these people, but they were getting what they wanted. And I wasn't trying to judge them. I thought that I was living my most purest, loving heart, but really I was just sitting back and being bitter because I stopped believing in myself. And so these are the times where I had to remind myself, like, the spiritual journey is not about being perfect. It's not about kumbaya. It's not about always trying to say the perfect thing or the right thing. It's about knowing how to challenge yourself and your energy so that it shows up for you. Remember, as above, so below? That's truly what it means. So if your below is always telling you you're not worthy, and you're agreeing with it, then you're going to fall deeper into that agreement. But if you're saying, it's saying you're not worthy, then it's like, yo, okay, prove it. I know I'm better than that. Now it's opposition. So energetically speaking, then when we talk about opposites attract, literally the energy that is trying to drag you down has no choice but to come along with you. If the side of you who believes in yourself is bigger than it, it's just going to drag it along. That's why when some people get to a level of having everything they want, they say more money, more problems, it's still going to be more issues if they have not grown within themselves, if they have not challenged themselves to grow up and change, right? So this is when I started to pay attention again. Now I'm in a disclosed location. I usually don't say where I'm currently at just because it's just how I am, but I moved from St. Louis. Again, I moved with the person, not for a person. I was already moving and I knew that I wanted to leave, but I moved with this person and they allowed me to stay with them momentarily. We were dating, we started to date, but we knew each other for over a year. And I figured like, okay, maybe they're ready. This person was not ready. This person also had the exact same name, similar initials, same upbringing as a person who I would call a frenemy. A person who I knew did not have my best interest. I mean, when we would talk to each other and they were drinking, I could see them rolling their eyes. They would always say, "You're into that spiritual stuff, right?" And they would just find ways to put me down. And I never paid attention. They used to say stuff like, "You're so stupid. Like, oh my God, if I had your looks, I would do this and that." And I just would listen to them. And I think they really thought that because when we were teenagers, I really respected them and I saw them as a person for guidance. But then when I got older, I realized this person doesn't care if I'm alive or dead. And so when I left and ended that friendship with them, energetically speaking, they followed me and they tried to crush my energy. They tried to, because when I moved in with this person, everything was great. I was only there a month and they started to pull apart and act real distant and start being really kind of narcissistic in their energy. And I laughed because I was like, I am not going to put up with this. I know who I am. An old me would have sat there and put up with it. But I always knew that the new me, the me that I would say the original me would have never. The me in the middle who was kind of down and depressed probably would have settled. The new me is like, absolutely not. This is not going to be my journey. I am not going to be in a relationship with anybody just because they have a nice house and a nice car and all this stuff. And so I packed up and left. And I made sure that I focused on myself. And I've always been this type of person where even now, the journey is never done. Even right now, I am on my journey of getting my own home, getting my own cars, getting my own land, all my own stuff. Because I was so focused on trying to attain it with someone else that I forgot I can do it by myself. This is what we're supposed to remember. The superpower is I can do it alone, but it will be great to have people around me to do it with. And so I am open always to allowing new energies in to build with me, but I will never step off of my path to let people pull me into their journey and become a side quest or a side character in their reality, because that's what we forget. Each of us literally is our own character, our own hero in our own journey, right? The hero's journey. It's literally how it felt. That's how my life felt. It's like the hero's journey, like leaving my home and having everything perfect and given to me and on this pedestal, and then getting knocked down, knocked down, knocked down, knocked down, going through hell and back, and then coming back home to self and remembering who I was. And so that's where I'm at now. So as long as you guys are here with me, this is what Storytime for me is about. Usually my content is about sharing tips and tricks and understandings of what spirituality is, but I also want to share my story too, so that you know I'm a real person. Nothing in my life is perfect, but it's perfect for me because I remember that I have perfect health. Like when I go to the doctors, they're always impressed with my health. They're always impressed with how I take care of myself. And that's the first wealth that matters to me, right? Especially as I age. My health is my most valuable asset, because as long as I'm healthy, I can do anything and go anywhere within this world. It's never over, it's never done. Like Mel Robbins said, this small patch, even though I told you all of that energy right there, from the time of 19 and partying in Chicago, the heaviness of what happened to me was only a 6-year stretch. Literally, only a 6-year stretch. So from that time, from 30 to about 37, is when everything was really heavy. From 37 to 40, it started to quiet down again, because I had to learn that peace is literally gonna feel boring sometimes. When they talk about that, it's true. Now, does it mean I have to love it always? Not always. Sometimes I'm like, I need some excitement again. And then I get a little bit of excitement and I'm like, okay, I remember. I need my peace. So it really is about remembering how to balance everything within yourself. And so as I continue to rebalance and recalibrate, the spiritual gifts have come back stronger. What I mean by spiritual gifts is my intuition. When I say something or do something, it is literally verbatim on point. My dreams are so real. I wish I could explain it to people, but I used to have really foggy dreams when I used to drink and do other things. I've been basically clean for a year. Like, yeah, I have drinks here and there, but like, I don't indulge in anything else extracurricular, any recreational habits. And so my brain cleared, my mind cleared, and I literally have dreams that it feels like I'm right there in them. And I started to write down my dreams. Like, I used to think it was weird when people say, write down your dreams. I was like, okay, whatever. No, write down your dreams. There are so many messages in them that it's crazy. And when I just decode them and I just speak it out and I write it out and I look it up and I research it and I use technology and Google or whatever I can to find answers, because I don't know everything. You know, you got to go find a book sometimes or something, or an article, whatever. It's literally saying like what I just experienced, like, this is what this means, this is what you need to do, this is where you are in life. And I'm like, So I psychoanalyze myself all the time. I have gone to therapy before, but they've said it. They're like, you're more consciously aware of where you're at and what you're doing, that I honestly can't help you. I would just be here for talk therapy to let you get it out, but you already know what to do. You're hyper aware. And there's a lot of us like that. That's why spirituality is so close to home to me, because I'm so hyper aware of how my brain and ego function that I needed something else to distract me. But again, you don't want to get to the point of spiritual bypassing, where you're allowing all of these messages to become your reality, but you're not actually living. So this long drawn out story was just meant to tell you, remember who you are. Go back and go over your story and your journey. Speak it out loud. This was the first time I really spoke my journey out loud, this into this depth. I've given like snippets about what I've been through, but like, this is a pretty in-depth, story. I mean, I have a lot more stories to tell within that time and realm, but this is an overview. And so I hope that me telling my story will encourage others to share their story. Storytelling has always been a form of culture. It's always been a form of healing work. Again, when you go to therapy, that's storytelling, because you're reliving something to tell your journey. And we have to remember that our journey is not our identity. Our identity is who we choose to be now, in the present. As people say, some cultures say there's no future. The future is what you create now. So the future is technically the present, always. And when you make that present moment happen by doing the work, by doing your shadow work, by doing your past ancestor work, by looking at how you were raised and what you believe and the cultures and the things that you were given and imprinted, when you decide to change the way that they did it, then that becomes the future self. And then you get to heal and you get to call in exactly what you want and who you deserve to be. That's why this work is so important. My journey is not over yet. It's just beginning. So I am so grateful that you guys are joining me on it, that you're a part of it with me, because there's definitely going to be more to come. And so now I'm at the point where I'm willing to share more up-to-date energy and more up-to-date stories, because before I like to live through it, post about it, and then talk about it later. Like, hey, I posted this thing a couple months ago, go check it out. But a lot of us do like to live off of live energy. And so I've been one of those people too, where, I love tarot and all this different stuff, but it's not the answer, it's just a tool. That's what we have to remember. Even the work that I'm doing, it's not the answer, it's a tool. None of us can tell each other stories for each other. Only we can do that for ourselves. And again, the story is not to relive, it's just to remember who we are so we can live. So at the end of the day, I love you, I thank you, I hope this makes sense. Again, I am still learning and growing, and I hope that you continue to do the same. And thank you for joining me along this spiritual journey. Please hit like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Get in the comments, share your stories as well. I would love to hear them. As always, love ya. Mwah, mwah, mwah.